Good morning or afternoon to everyone out there. Welcome to FSMA Fridays. It's hard to believe we are the end of October already. Where has this year gone? Delighted to see many people streamed on to our call today. We have an interesting topic, certainly. We're going to be just chatting a little bit, of course, about what's going on with FSMA, the latest updates as we do each month. And then also, of course, we've got a little bit of an election going on here, so a little bit of insights, if you will, on the impact that might have on our industry. My name is Jill Bender, and with Safety Chain, delighted as always to host this session. A few housekeeping tips, as always. Reminder, we will send out the recording early next week. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A tab, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Privacy, as always, is important to us, so you'll just see the panelists. But like I said, I'm not surprised. Lots of people joining in for this call. And we'll go ahead and go through some pre-submitted questions and take it from there. I'm delighted that Dr. Acheson's with us on the phone today. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
He was just sharing with me that he's in Ohio, so we will not talk about baseball at all, but certainly, I'm sure there's many folks out there keen on watching the next game. So I say we just dive on in. Tell us, please, David, what's the latest in the past month with FSMA?
Well, yeah, thanks, Jill. And, you know, thanks to everybody for dialing in today. Obviously, this is a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek FSMA Friday, I think, sort of talking about election. But I think there's some interesting things that we could talk about. Latest updates from the FDA. Not really anything super FSMA related. I'll touch on a few little sort of tidbits that have popped out from some of the leadership at FDA recently about FSMA implementation in just a few minutes. But so I think let's just move right along, Jill, and dive into some of the other specific questions. So nothing major and great that I've seen on FSMA updates from the regulators.
Okay, great, thank you. And as we mentioned, you know, we are going to sort of touch on the election year, what we are seeing so far. So tell us, David, as far as your crystal ball, we'll say this session, what have we seen with regard to the pending election and food safety?
Well, you know, this question has come up months ago in terms of what might we see when under a Trump presidency or a Clinton presidency with regard to food safety. And as always with presidential elections, or at least in my experience of time in Washington and staying connected with that scene, is the White House reacts to major situations that pertain to food safety. And thank goodness for all concerned, we haven't had one. So if folk sort of cast their memories back to previous elections, when Obama came in, we were just coming out of the other end of peanut butter issues and pistachio issues and a variety of things that unquestionably had impact on where an administration went. And as I say, mercifully, we haven't had that. The only thing that I've seen is a comment from Trump around deregulating FDA, and we may touch on that in a subsequent point on this, Jill. But let me sort of preempt that a little bit. And you know, one of the things that sort of emerged was, and this is the only thing I've seen, frankly, is about whether a Republican administration would deregulate FDA. You know, and this is sort of a little bit just an anti-regulation type statement that's as much focused on the Environmental Protection Agency as it is anything else, and comments about the FDA food police and reducing inspections. And, you know, frankly, when I read this, it was a little tongue-in-cheek, and I'm thinking, well, whoever wrote this doesn't even understand the regulatory process. So, you know, I think it was rhetoric. I think it was fluff. I think it was some sort of shoot-from-the-hip statement, to be honest with you. So, fundamentally, short of some major crisis blowing up, I really don't see either of our candidates changing anything on food safety. I don't think there's an appetite for it. there isn't an obvious need for it. So right now, I'm pretty comfortable that what we've got today will continue. But we can speculate in a minute about what possibly could happen, Jill. So back to you.
Sure, no, absolutely. I do remember when that comment came out myself, and we all kind of scratched our heads and said, let's see where this is going. And to your point, I don't think it really went anywhere. So,
no.
so yeah, that was interesting. So sort of moving on then, sort of looking ahead, and to your point of, there's nothing that's just blatant out there in the news, thankfully, but, as far as foreseeing, what they'll do regards to really more FSMA, I think, would be the key question here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, right. No, it is. It really is. And keeping in mind that this is FSMA Friday, we really need to sort of maintain that as a theme. And I think that before rules went final, there was obviously rumor that these rules would get turned back. They kind of get kicked down the road until after a new president was sworn into office, and an FDA would be told back off. No FSMA regulations were going to change everything. I didn't think that would happen for 1 second, frankly, knowing the way that Washington operates. And of course, it didn't. We've got the final rules. They are there, and I don't think a presidential candidate will spend 1 second thinking about the Food Safety Modernization Act. Absent something huge blowing up that requires some, quote, political, close quote, solution. So we should assume as a food industry that the regulatory strategy on the Food Safety Modernization Act is here to stay forever. As I'm sure everybody on this call understands, there are a series of new regs that haven't come out. Obviously, none of them as massive as the preventive control rules and foreign supply verification, produce, etc. So we got the big ones out, which again was a very aggressive timeline. I mean, those moved really, really fast for FDA and for Washington, and I think with good reason. Is that I think there was a genuine question whether if these rules didn't go final under the Obama administration, whether there would be some attempt to slow them down. And since the Office of the Management and Budget in Washington does control language in final regs, especially big ones like this, and Office of Management and Budget is under direct control of the White House, it de facto becomes political. So there is capacity, if not to actually make a regulation go away, there's absolutely the capacity to make it go slow. And I'm sure there are people on this call who remember the history of the egg rule, which took about 12 years to work its way through the whole process. So there is clearly the capacity to slow these things down. But again, I don't see that happening. I really don't. I think it'll just continue at the same pace.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, I was trying to think about this when you were talking, or we chatted about this one before, as far as what would drive change, right? Short of an enormous amount of money being asked, perhaps, to regulate it and track it. That'll be interesting.
Yeah, and it's a question that always pops into my head, and those who know me know that I've spoken about this often, is would either president drive down the road of a single food safety agency? And I don't see that on the horizon either. Again, not the appetite, way more significant questions and challenges weighing on a presidential candidate and a White House and an administration than a single food safety agency. But that's not really FSMA related, but it's a broader food safety question.
Right, and I only can imagine undertaking that would seem, and if it's worth it with everything else going on. So we talk about, you sort of touched on this, just in regards to sort of predictions, with the next, I guess, administration, really, with the 4 years of food safety. I mean, you sort of already touched on this a little bit, but any other thoughts on that?
Well, other than to say that I see the FSMA train continuing to rumble down the tracks, There's obviously a great deal of implementation that's going to kick in. The deadlines for the two big PC rules for large companies is, we know we're past that. Every other deadline that's going to come in will be post-election. I don't, frankly, see those changing. I don't think those compliance dates are going to shift. They've already just shifted a little bit in certain areas, just sort of more on alignment than really anything else. So it's kind of a logical shift to try to align the rules a little better. So I think that's probably not going to be added to. I think so. Predictions for the next 4 years. We're seeing I think a change in FDA's approach to food safety. They're currently, I think, less tolerant. They're less open to conversations. They are feeling a lot of pressure, the agency itself. I think much more so on the FDA side than FSIS. So I do see that trend continuing. I really do. It's not related to FSMA per se. It's more related to lack of tolerance for conversations around scope of recalls, which is driven by the recent Inspector General report. Again, nothing to do with FSMA. But in a minute, Jill, I think we could talk about, okay, so what is FDA saying about FSMA implementation itself? But I see this aggressive stance continuing forward frankly, under either administration.
Right.
But I will make one point, and that's, again, historical. When a Republican administration comes in, there is sometimes, and I think we've all seen that, I certainly have, is the political environment in Washington becomes one of a more relaxed regulatory enforcement. And an interesting question is, again, not directly FSMA related, but very, very relevant to everybody in the food industry, is will we see this trend of criminal prosecutions continue under a Clinton administration or under a Trump administration? And my view of that is under a Clinton administration, absolutely. It will continue. I have no doubt. Under a Trump administration, possibly not to the same level. Crystal ball's a little opaque. It's got a few cracks in it, but that's what I would predict. That's my thinking, Jill.
Well, based on historically, I mean, regardless of who's the actual candidates, right? Yeah, and it's interesting. Well, then this sort of touches on the next topic we had here as far as, what are they currently doing in regards to FSMA? There was quite a bit of discussion on that in the last FSMA Fridays because there was something, more fresh in our minds. But, thoughts on this?
Yeah, we'll obviously have some time for a few questions at the end of this. So I'm collecting stories. I'm collecting examples of what exactly is FDA doing. And we've got a bunch of people on this webinar, so if any of you out there have had an FDA inspector show up kind of taking a FSMA posture, let us know what you're seeing. I'm not seeing a lot. And Jill, this is a total anecdote. But we have a client in the Acheson Group that we've worked with, and we help them develop an approach to building a food safety plan. And I think they had a good plan put together by the end of the engagement. About 3 weeks ago, an FDA inspector showed up, and this person arrived, this inspector arrived, and the obvious question was, are you here to do a FSMA inspection? And the answer that was given by the FDA inspector was, oh no, I'm not here to do that. I've just completed my PCQI training, and I've really come here to look at what you've done to learn from you. And
interesting.
Yeah, right. Oh, interesting is right. And I think we have said many times that the FDA will be learning from the private sector as more than anything else, because I know there are sectors of food production, manufacturing facilities that are way ahead of the thinking here than FDA, which raises the concerns that the private side will know a whole lot more about the details of the rules than the inspectors. Having said that, we got, just very recently, there were a couple of interviews that came out from FDA, and we've actually just, our most recent newsletter kind of focused on these. And one that I found particularly interesting was a Q&A with Joanne Gibbons. And I know Joanne, she's a great lady, and we were colleagues together when I was at FDA. But Joanne is currently the co-chair of the FSMA Operations Team Steering Committee. She's in the Office of Regulatory Affairs, and she addressed a few questions. And, you know, this is obviously an FDA interview, but there's some interesting things that came out. You know, one of the questions was posed as, okay, FDA, what are you going to do about enforcement? And the comment from Joanne was, and quote, as we enter this new chapter, the FDA's primary focus will continue to be on education, training, and technical assistance to help companies comply with the new requirements. So, education, training, and technical assistance. And I hope that is making all of my industry colleagues feel really soft and squishy and warm and comfortable, thinking that FDA is going to educate, train, and assist us with compliance. Well, guys, ladies, don't be fooled. And, you know, as you continue to read through this, it's like, well, what will happen if FDA shows up and finds somebody's not in compliance? And, you know, this is an Acheson interpretation of what was said in here, but it basically says, we'll nail you nevertheless. So we've got kind of the softly, squishy, we want to play nice, but you don't get it right, and we'll be all over you. And so that's a bit of a mixed message that sort of floated out of this. So I think that FDA recognizes they need to provide a lot of assistance. They're talking that talk, the reading in between the lines of this is the agency saying, you need to take these regs really seriously, and you need to get these right. You know, they're making, again, this is a comment that's made in here, is that, again, quote, many businesses that are large, either more than 500, who have to be compliant as of now, already have a HACCP program. And the comment is, we, as is FDA, don't expect them to need to make many changes to come into compliance. And it's like, well, that's a gentle statement. But right. I think we all recognize that there are many aspects of FSMA compliance that go beyond HACCP. And that almost sends a mixed message. It's like, well, if you've got a HACCP plan, you're fine. Well, does your HACCP plan control and talk about risks that go beyond HACCP? And many HACCP plans don't. And if you aren't talking about some of those other risks, you'll get dinged. So, you know, we're hearing sort of two messages from FDA, but I think to circle back to the question, Jill, here is what are they currently doing? They are trying to train and educate internally as well as externally, but I think they will also begin to press the enforcement button as we go forward. And like I said a minute ago, people who are on this call, folk on this call, if you've got experience, share it. I think a big part of what we can do through the FSMA Friday community is learn from each other.
Right.
So I think that's going to be an important part going forward, Jill, is let's use this forum to learn from each other about what we're seeing. So anyway, good question.
Yeah,
Thank you.
No, that was good. You know, it was interesting. I just came back from the SQF annual conference, and we were having a discussion, I think, over lunch with a group of folks about many that had just gone through the PCQI training, and the question was posed of, you know, from that, you know, how far away were they, you know, what were the gaps? And obviously all over the board, of course, based on the different type of companies or whatever else. But the sense was that, yes, there are gaps, but it's just more of understanding them, not necessarily the path to get there wasn't as hard as they had thought. So it's just sort of uncovering, if you will, right?
But
that was just one little discussion. I'm sure if I went to another table, it might have been completely different, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it was interesting. So again, in this sort of a nebulous question of, what can we expect going forward? And that's just been sort of the theme of what we've been talking about today. More guidelines coming out, right? That was our discussion. But what else to share?
Yeah, no, I think that's really what I've just been talking about. What can we expect going forward? I think, we kind of still get some more guidance documents. Again, don't have timelines, don't know quite when they will show, but I've kind of, I think, covered what we can expect going forward is don't be complacent, don't take any of this for granted. If you're not there yet, I think the FDA understand that this is a heavy lift for many, but as we've said on previous FSMA Fridays, have a strategy, be able to tell the regulators, well, here are the gaps that we've got. We know we've got gaps. Here's what we're doing to fill them in terms of components of our food safety plan that we're trying to put together under the preventive control rules. It's pretty much covered, and the advice that we've discussed before on FSMA Fridays still pertains, is keep pushing, shoot for those deadlines, and if you're not quite there, then have a good explanation and a good strategy to explain to an inspector where the gaps are and what you're doing to fill them.
And what the path is now, absolutely. And I will look into as far as, what it's so, and obviously one of the reasons we keep FSMA Fridays going is all the people that join each and every month, and we need to create sort of that form, if you will, like you were talking about, David, as far as sharing the experiences that, of when the FDA is coming knocking. I think what we would all learn from that. So I'll take that back as homework to try to figure out the easiest and best way so that we can all glean, insights from that. Absolutely. So with that, let's go ahead and open up a little bit of questions. We have a little bit more time here, and I've seen one that's come in, and I will go ahead and pose that. It's actually a few that have come in. Let me go ahead and pose one right now, David, and take us out of screen, so full screen, where everyone can see the Q&A tab. So we have Mike asking, and we sort of touched on this, but it goes a little bit further. With USDA and FSMA having trouble maintaining inspection staff, where do you see problems arising with staffing the FDA and timelines for meeting inspection ability?
Yeah, well, a common question that comes up is with the agencies talking about all this enforcement activity, and do they have the budget to hire the people to do it? And as we've said in the past, and I think it's the same now, is no, they don't. They really don't have a dramatically increased budget to significantly increase inspectional capacity. I do believe they're on an aggressive training timeline. I'm not personally aware that they're losing inspectors any quicker than they ever did before. And if somebody knows that that's a fact, that would be kind of an interesting point to share. But they've got a lot of lifting to do with educating and training their people. I'll make a comment on that, is that there are certainly some who believe that if you've attended PCQI training for 2 days or 2.5 days, you are de facto fully trained in food safety risk-based approaches. And I think anybody who's been through that training would recognize, well, not exactly. You can't train experience and understanding and depth of knowledge in science and compress it into 2.5 days. You get a general sense of what the FDA expects and what your remit is and what you have to do as a preventive control qualified individual. But actually having truly the insights to understand risk-based preventive controls and to look at ingredients, ask questions around microbiological, chemical, and physical hazards. What might be there? Is this a risk that requires a preventive control? What would that preventive control look like? None of that is built into PCQI training in any detail and depth, and nor could it be. It's not meant to be a degree in food safety per se. And this is kind of what the regulators are being trained under, I think. So I think we're going to have a lot of inspectors as people join the agency and get on the bandwagon of being FSMA inspectors, they're really not going to know an awful lot about some of these details. And I would see conflicts, and I would see differences of opinion, because much of this isn't black and white. And the limited resources that the FDA is under with hirings is going to just compound that moving forward. So we will be in a bit of a bind, which again sort of makes me go back to let's learn from what folks are saying. If you're seeing inspectors and situations that are clearly off base, then let's get that out there. And you know, we got plenty of forums that we can write about, and you know, let FDA know from our perspective that they perhaps need to change, and may not do any good, but we can at least vocalize that concern.
Well, it could hopefully guide the conversation a bit. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Well, so it's interesting, sort of a follow-up question here. We'll just take time for a few more here. And I don't think I caught this, but the FDA has announced several inspections in Europe. And, you know, sort of the thoughts on how they're handling foreign inspections, if there's any sort of difference in the U.S. and, you know, are they accepting, you know, the GFSI or the different certifications out there as part of that?
Well, so far the FDA has not simply said they're accepting GFSI, or at least if they've said that, I've not seen it. I think that the approach to an FDA inspection, in my personal experience, is it makes no difference whether it's in California or Massachusetts, Europe, Vietnam, or China. It is essentially the same philosophical approach of being compliant with FDA regulatory requirements. So if an inspector is going into a production facility in Europe that is manufacturing a product that's under FSMA, then the standards, the expectations of that production is going to be no different than if it's manufactured domestically in the United States. That's the philosophy behind FSMA. That's the expectation behind FSMA. That's certainly the way I would expect the regulators to execute on an inspectional strategy. They are not going to walk into a plant and say, are you GFSI certified, with an affirmative from the plant, and the inspector would say, okay, then you're FSMA compliant, thanks, have a nice day, and walk out. Not at all. I think the whole point of GFSI in this context is that we've learned by doing comparative analysis is that if you are GFSI compliant, then you're an awful long way to having checked all the same boxes. But it is not a one-for-one. Showing somebody your GFSI certification isn't going to have the FDA turn around after 5 minutes and say, okay, well, I'll go on to my next assignment. And anybody who's hoping that will happen, put that out of your head, at least anytime soon. It is not what this is about. Equal standards, that's the philosophy behind FSMA. If they don't maintain that equality, we get into trade battles, and so I'm anticipating that. That's always been the dogma from the regulators, is that we inspect the same standard, whether it's down the street or on the other side of the world.
No, absolutely seems to make sense, of course. So I was looking at one of these questions as you were just finishing that came in, and we talked about sort of from an equality standpoint. I'll just throw this sort of last one at you, Dave, and then we'll wrap up here. Just in regards to targeting, you know, which ones will be targeted first for inspections. I know we've touched on this before, but that's where, you know, not all companies are the same, right? As far as then, you know, who will be targeted for inspections earlier than others.
Are we talking there, Jill, in terms of what types of facilities, do you think?
Yeah, I think, yeah, and I think, right. Yeah, that's sort of my guess of what this question is, you know, and I think, you know, you've touched on this before, right? If it's more high risk, you know, what's being produced, right? That's what
I still think, to be honest with you. I mean, keep in mind that the FDA needs to continue to do its work. So there's a big chunk of FDA inspections that are for cause. which means that there's been consumer complaints, there's been a finding, there's been an incident, there's been a recall, and the FDA is doing a for-cause inspection. That will continue, and I think that some of those for-cause inspections will also morph in, oh, by the way, while we're inspecting you for a consumer complaint or a recall, we're going to check you out for FSMA because we're here. When it comes to priorities for FSMA compliance, I think it will track with high-risk facilities as, well, I was going to say as defined by the FDA, but as we discussed before, the FDA haven't really defined what they mean by high-risk facilities, other than giving us the sense, which we all know is a high-risk facility is one in which there has been a history, I don't mean in that plant, but a history of problems historically with a particular type of commodity or structure, and obviously if the plant's got an individual history of compliance challenges in the past, then they would be on a high-risk list. So I think that will be the order of business. And the original statute in FSMA, for those who can remember back to 2011, talks about frequency of inspections for higher risk versus lower risk facilities with a frequency of inspection obviously driven by risk. So right now, that's the best lens that we've got. If you look at what it is you do and make probably a determination through, is this a product, whether you've had a problem or not, is this a product where others in our sector had a problem? Is this considered to be a high-risk problem product? Is there a history with it? Then you're going to be high risk, and you're going to get a visit sooner rather than later. If you fall in the low risk, then it'll be later rather than sooner, unless it's for cause, which kind of crosses the bounds of whether you're high risk or low risk. So really not much granularity beyond that, Jill. I think that's the way it's going to play out.
Well, and as with anything, there's a plethora of resources to everyone, whether it's internally or externally, such as the Acheson Group to help guide that path and conversation and make some of those determinations, or at least define those for you further. So with that, I am going to go ahead and wrap up today's session. It could have been, I was looking for a heated debate between us, David, but didn't happen, and that's okay. We've had enough of that, I think, with the elections, but I just sort of wanted to throw out a few other reminders. Certainly, as you all know, the Acheson Group is there to help you. Should you have further questions or need specifics in defining where your gaps are within your current plans to being compliant, they're absolutely a great resource. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention safety chain systems and helping you automate and ensure that your programs are actually being implemented, executed upon, and that you're able to improve them with the right data. Our systems are there. And also, as always, lots of great information out there as we continue the dialogue and insights. Next month, we were on cue to talk about environmental controls, David, so we'll have to talk about that and see if that makes sense or if there's something else to address for next month's FSMA Fridays. And then a couple other learning opportunities on safety chain side. We have a few webinars coming up about controlling material loss and taking more charge of your CIP process, if there's any interest in that. And I know, David, you always have some great resources. I read your posts and your newsletters regularly, so I encourage folks to visit your site, achesongroup.com. Any other parting words? Otherwise, we'll look forward to a great conversation next month.
No, I think we're up for, without speculating where the election is going to go, Jill, which is kind of the theme today. It'll be an interesting next 4 years wherever it ends up, and I'll leave it at that.
I think that was a very PC way of saying it. And just a reminder, next month, because of the holidays here in the States, this session is a little bit earlier on the calendar, November 18th, and as always, you'll get reminders. So thank you so much, David. Wherever you are next time, we'll look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's FSMA Fridays.
So thank you, Jill, and thank you, everybody, for joining us.